Hello Sector Watchers, welcome to the show. This is the 76th episode of Sector Spotlight on Tuesday the 20th of April and recorded on the 19th. My name is Julius de Kempenaer and I'm presenting to you from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Thank you for joining me again. My contact details are on the screen, so if there is anything you'd like to share with me, please use the channel that suits you best. This week we'll have a real quick look at last week's rotations, but I'll be spending the better part of this half hour talking about the tails on relative rotation graph, about what they mean, how you can read them, and what stories they are telling us. Or better, we are going to discuss the tail of the tails. Got it? Anyway, here we go. Last week's rotations on asset classes. We very quickly go over the list and we see both commodity ETFs, GSG and DJP at the top at 3.4 and 3.6%. And above the benchmark VBINX we have ITOT and VNQ. And that means that the remainder of the asset classes that we're tracking here, which are the fixed income related ones, Gov, corporate and high yield, are all slightly lower than the benchmark but still positive, and the only asset class losing is the US dollar index. You see ITOT tail rolling over a little bit, VNQ losing some relative strength during the week despite the strong performance. And what I wanted to share with you, because we're going to talk about tails a lot later on in the show, but this is an interesting thing to monitor here, and that's the tail for ITOT, and especially how it rotated since, let's say, October last year. And if we position it right here and we highlight ITOT and you look at the interaction between the RS ratio and the RS momentum line, you see that the RS ratio is above 100 all the time and RS momentum oscillates around it, and that that gives you a rotation that looks like this, where it, here we go, rotates from leading into weakening, back up to weakening, to leading, to weakening, and those are all these rotations around 100, and it keeps the ITOT tail at the right hand side of the graph, indicating the strength of the stock market that is still there. It was just a very short intermezzo here. Now let's take a little bit more in-depth look at sectors over last week and what we can see there. A lot of rotations there. A lot of these tails have been bending over the last, this is including Monday, because you can see it's including the 19th, which is today when I'm recording it. So if we go here, this is until last Friday, and you can see that technology and discretionary are already bending over inside the leading quadrant. And if you look back previous sector spotlights or some articles in the RRG blog, you can see that I've been very, very cautious about discretionary and technology, because on the weekly chart they are inside the lagging quadrant and they're still being pushed further into the lagging quadrant. So the hiccup that we saw over the last week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, not convinced yet, and the fact that they're now already rolling over inside the leading quadrant is absolutely not taking away that that cautiousness, well, things are cooking under the hood. I hope you understand what I mean. And if we add today, so this is Friday, and if we add today's price action, then you see that these rotations are actually continuing, and that means rolling further down for discretionary and for technology, while, for example, sectors like utilities and real estate are curling back up, and so is materials and industrials and staples. That's a little bit more the defensive stuff. Healthcare also rolling up on the weekly. That's also inside the leading quadrant, so we've got to keep an eye on that one. And you can see that communication services, which was pretty good until last Friday, pointing into the improving quadrant, and today is actually hooking back down, so we need to keep an eye on that, how that is going. And energy far inside the lagging quadrant, and on the weekly RRG it's far to the right, so that's offsetting. On the weekly RRG, energy is still the strongest sector out there, so I think that this is a temporary setback for energy, and I'm watching the daily tail for energy to pick up, and once it starts moving into the improving quadrant again, we may see another pickup of relative strength for energy. For now, keep an eye on technology and discretionary, because those are two very important and significant sectors that will very likely dictate the course of the S&P in coming weeks. The fact that they're rolling over inside the leading quadrant right now is adding to my belief that the push into the lagging quadrant on the weekly RRG is not over yet, and we have a little bit more weakness for tech and discretionary to come in the weeks ahead of us. This was my overview, and we're going to rapidly move to the tail of the tails. In this segment of the show, I would like to talk a little bit more in depth about the tails on the RRGs, on the relative rotation graphs. And that comes from a question that I received last week, and I wanted to discuss it in last week's Sector Spotlight, but I just spent too much time on discussing and going over all the positions in the long-short basket that we're maintaining. And I promised to write an article about it, which I did start, but when I was writing the article, I soon realized that this is a subject that lends itself much better to a visual explanation on the screen while I'm talking about it and showing you what I mean. I think that just resonates a lot better. So that's what we're going to do. Let's open up a relative rotation graph. So it's just the member tools widget, and you can see here that the RRG charts is one of the choices, and it gives you the RRG for the major indexes. This is what everybody sees who is not a StockCharts member. Hopefully all of you, or the majority, is a StockCharts member, so you should be able to bring up one of the predefined groups on RRG. And let's just use the most widely used one, most often used one, which is the one for US sectors using the State Street Spider funds. Now, this is what you will see initially. And let me bring it up, because we're going to talk about the tails, and we're going to talk about this RRG. So we can set it to use maximum screen real estate, and you can do that by just dragging that out and just making it a lot bigger. You can use obviously these buttons here, fit, center, max, zoom in, zoom out, etc. Now, one of the questions also that I get a lot is about the animation speed. I like to set it to center when I animate, so the axes will adjust themselves. But often people will say that it is difficult to track because the animation goes pretty fast. And what you can do is actually also drag the slider here in the graph, as I'm doing right now. So you can scroll through history with your mouse. But what I prefer doing is actually use my arrow keys. So right now I'm hitting my right arrow key, so I go forward in time, or I can hit my left arrow key and go backward in time. I think that's a very good way to study an RRG and see what the various rotations and the sectors are doing just by tapping through history, and you can see where you are on this node here. This is the end date of the tail. By the way, that's interesting as we are talking right now. As you can see, the date here is April 19, which is Monday, today, when I'm recording it. And here you will see that this is last week, that it is dated April 12. But it's a weekly RRG. And these weekly RRGs, they close on the Friday. So what you got to do, what you got to keep in mind is that on StockCharts.com, dates are, when they are more than daily, so weekly, monthly, etc. They are, the date timestamp is the first period of that period, so the first day of that period. So for a week, this means that this is actually the week ending of the week beginning April 12. I know it's a little bit confusing, but once you make that click in your head, I'm sure you understand. So we're now the week ending that started on April 12. So the last week is the week that started April 12. So if we go forward, when it says April 19, obviously today is April 19, so that there is no confusion there. However, this will remain here until the week ends. So that is Monday 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So Friday the 23rd will this RRG end, or at least this section of that tail end. So that last bit of that tail is, this is the week, this is the section of the week, and for now that's only one day. And that last section is fluid until that period changes, or ends in this case. So if you would check this RRG during the week, you could see small variations of that last observation moving around because new data has come in. On Friday, after Friday's close, that observation will be graved in stone. It will be fixed and it will not change anymore. And then a new segment of the RRG will start, which then is again live. And that also goes when you go to daily. If you go to daily, and here is the daily. So this is right now during the day on April the 19th. And you can see the prices of the S&P and the various sectors. Now, I'm not going to hit refresh immediately, but what you will see after a while is that these prices have changed, and so will the last observation. It's only minimal, so it'll be hard to detect, but that last bit during the day is a live observation. After today's close, those observations will be fixed, and then tomorrow a new segment starts. So let's see what happens if I have spoken long enough. Let's look at the S&P for 1472 and discretionary 7797. Well, there you go. These have now changed. 77.99 for 1478. Obviously, that did not have a major impact on that tail, but the last observations are calculated using these prices, just so you know. Now, what does that tail do? That tail is nothing else than just connecting the last observations, the last RRG data points. And in this case, it's 5 weeks. 5 weeks, as I said. Let's zoom in. And you can see that it actually has 5 segments. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is the 5th week. So we've got 6 points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Changing the tail length does not change anything on the position of the observations on the chart. That's probably something that is very often misunderstood. People think that when they change the tail length, that they have another period of looking at things, or sometimes they refer to it as a look back period, which is completely not the case. So the only thing that this tail length does is cosmetic. It is only showing more history. It's showing longer history. It does not change anything in where the observations are. So that's important to actually keep in mind, that changing the tail length is only cosmetic in nature, and it doesn't change anything in the interpretation. It doesn't change anything in where these observations are positioned. What I try to tell people often is that the tail length should be balanced between the number of observations on your screen. So basically, The tail length is a balance between the numbers. You should balance the number of observations on your screen and the number of symbols, or the number of symbols with the tail length. And let me explain this. This is 11 sectors, so you could, quite comfortably go to maybe even 10, and you'll still be able to see what's going on. There's a few overlapping here, but nothing is. It's still very readable. Now, if we would go and load up, let's say, all members of the technology sector, and we would have a 10-week tail, 12-week tail, that's becoming pretty messy. So that's, difficult to read and difficult to understand. You may want to, if you have a big screen, zoom it out, and you'll have a lot better ability to monitor these tails and look at them. But in the end, it's still messy. So you should set this maybe a little bit shorter. Go to 6 weeks, or I don't know, 4 weeks, whatever. And you can still do your normal routines and scroll through them. Let's go back to the sector RRG. So that was the basic explanation of those tails. So there's no change in tail length, nothing for a look back period. It's just connecting the various observations, and it's just cosmetic in nature. Now, another thing that I get asked very frequently is, what does the thickness of the tail mean? And the close observer may have noticed that, let's say, the tail for XLE here is much thicker than the one for XLB and XLI and XLRE. What that thickness means or measures is the distance from the center of the chart. So XLE is, well, in this case, clearly furthest away from the center of the chart. So it's a thick tail. XLB is very close to the center of the chart. So if we zoom in there, you see that it is much thinner. And so is, for example, here, technology, XLK, which is also pretty close to the center of the chart. And the further it's the last observation, by the way, the further the last observation of a tail is from the center of the chart, the thicker the tail is. So that that thickness of the tail tells you something about the distance from the center of the chart. And why is that? Because the further away a tail is from the center of the chart, the bigger the difference, the bigger the potential for alpha, because it's way out from the benchmark. It's a big difference from the benchmark. That's why that differentiation is there. Another item that we can get information from on the RRG and the tails is the length of the tail. On this RRG, you can immediately see some differences between, for example, the tail on energy, which is quite long, and the one on financials, which is relatively short, and so is real estate or technology, which is a little bit hidden behind here. But Staples XLP, on the other hand, is quite long again, and so is industrials, which is the one behind this one here. The tail length is basically adding up the weekly segments. So you get the tail length by adding up these individual segments, and you can immediately see that this distance is not always the same. There is a difference between the distance between the observations. And that gives us information. And basically the basic takeaway, the basic information that you can get from this is that long tails equal power and short tails equal stability. So power as in strong momentum, strong power behind the move. so long tails indicate that there is a significant power behind that move. So the rollover of energy here over the last 5 weeks is a pretty powerful move relative to the S&P 500. And so is the increase in strength for staples, which has taken place over the last 5 weeks. That's a pretty impressive, it's a pretty strong move. And it's nice to see that utilities, which is sort of moving in the same direction, but at a much shorter tail. And you can immediately see that the move for staples is much more powerful than the one for utilities. So long tails equal power, equal momentum behind the move. Short tails indicate stability. And those of you who've watched Sector Spotlight more often, you may have heard me say that sector such and so or asset class such and so is on the right hand side with a short tail, i.e. at a stable relative uptrend. And that's what you see, for example, here with financials, which is at the right hand side, which means that it's in a relative uptrend versus the S&P 500 and measured on the RS ratio is the second strongest sector at the moment. But it's losing a little bit of relative momentum. But again, just like staples and utilities, compare the loss of momentum in financials with the loss of momentum in energy over the last few weeks, and you see there's quite a big difference. So where energy is actually rolling over, you see that financials is sort of stable at a almost static location on the RRG. And that indicates that the relative uptrend for financials is going through a little bit of a setback, but it's still in an uptrend and it's very stable. So the basic takeaway for the tail length and what you should keep in the back of your mind is that long tails signal power and short tails signal stability. So a short tail on the right hand side signals a stable relative uptrend. On the left hand side signals a stable relative downtrend. If there is a long tail like energy here in the leading quadrant that's rolling over, you got to pay attention because it's losing relative momentum quite rapidly. Now, it's still at very high RS ratio levels, so it may not be too concerning yet, but yet I would like to investigate that. On the other side, the rapid increase of relative momentum of the staples sector, which is now improving but still on the left-hand side, that's also something that I want to investigate because I want to see what that power, what that increase in power, that momentum behind that move means. And the third element on the tails where we can get information is what we call the heading, so the direction in which that tail is traveling. And I've stylized. This is a snapshot of the RRG, and I've highlighted the industrials sector here, the tail of the industrial sector, and the heading or the direction is measured or taken using a compass. And you may know, or if you don't, then I'll tell you now. North is 0 or 360 degrees. East is 90 degrees. South is 180 degrees. West is 270 degrees. And then you're back up north again. Taking the heading on an RRG tail is done from a previous observation to the current observation. So you position the center of the compass on the previous observation, and then you look at where it is pointing. And in this case, it's around 30%. So the RRG heading for XLI is around 30%. Now you can also do that not necessarily from T-1, but if you want, sometimes these tails can move quite rapidly. And if you want to have like a longer term heading or a bigger picture heading, you could also think about positioning the center of the compass 2 or 3 periods back and look at it then, and you can see that it's for XLI it's almost the same. It's a little bit lower because you know that angle is a little bit steeper when you point out it's almost going there. So that heading, and what we've learned is that headings between 0 and 90 degrees are usually strong. And why is that? Because it means that the tail is gaining on both axes. It's rising on the RS momentum scale, and it's also rising at the RS ratio scale. And on the RRG, that means that you're pushing deeper into the leading quadrant. Now the same goes on the other side. So if you look at technology at the moment, and you look at the heading for technology, then you see that it is pointing in that southwestern direction. So right now that's around 240 degrees. And that means that this tail is losing on both scales. So it's losing in momentum and it's losing in relative strength. So that's pushing that sector further into the lagging quadrant. So that direction, that RRG heading, is another source of information on the tail of an RRG. So if we go back to wrapping it up, then you have obviously the connection of the dots. You can have a cosmetic effect of adding more history to it, so you get a better view of the rotational characteristics of a sector and of that graph. You can look at the thickness, which tells you whether a sector is far out or nearby. Far out usually offers bigger opportunities, bigger moves, rather than stuff that is closer by, which shows a very thin tail. You have the length of the tail, which gives you information about the power behind the move, the momentum, the strength behind the move, or whether it's a short tail, that it is a stable move, either up or down. And finally, the heading of the tail, the RRG heading, which gives you information about the underlying strength and whether it's gaining on both or on one axis. So these elements are all coming from reading the tail on an RRG. So that the tail on that RRG can tell you a tale about the story that's behind that sector or behind that universe actually. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes Sector Spotlight for this week. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or remarks, please let me know through one of the channels on the screen. I will reply in the same thread. If you're watching on YouTube, please let us know by clicking the thumbs up icon. That is if you like the video, of course. If you're watching on StockCharts TV or one of the on-demand options, please use any of the other communication channels. I honestly try to answer all of my messages, although it may not happen the next day, and I sure hope you understand. Sector Spotlight airs every Tuesday from 10:30 to 11 AM Eastern, with replays on the StockCharts YouTube or any of the on-demand channels. For now, please stay safe, and I hope to see you again next week for a new episode of Sector Spotlight.
Hey guys, Dave Keller here with StockCharts.com. Thanks so much for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, and we hope you did, hit the like button right below. Also, we have so much new content every day. Consider subscribing to the channel. Just hit the subscribe button in the video or right below. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Have a fantastic day.